Starwalker Studios presents Game Master's Journey, a podcast all about tabletop role-playing games from the perspective of the captain's chair. Greetings, gamer, and welcome to Game Master's Journey. I'm your host, Lex Starwalker. Welcome to the Season 2 premiere. Today, I'll dig into the inspiration mechanic for D&D 5th edition. So join me on the journey. Together, we can become game masters truly worthy of the title. Hello, listener and fellow GM and or player. Welcome to Game Master's Journey. Welcome to episode 23, and welcome to Season 2. It's so great to be back. Originally, when I conceived of this show, I was not planning to do so many episodes about Dungeons and Dragons, but I've been having a lot of fun doing them, and the topics just keep coming, and a lot of my listeners out there are really digging the D&D stuff, and I've had numerous requests from people that I do more about D&D. I also, every day, almost online, see someone posting somewhere about, they finally got around to trying D&D 5th edition, and they're loving it, and they're just blown away by this game. So I guess it'd be crazy not to talk about it. However, that said, I am going to be discussing some other games very soon on the horizon. I have some Star Wars episodes that are going to be coming at you. I've got at least one interview coming about the Star Wars games by Fantasy Flight Games, and I'm going to be talking a bit about it myself. This is a system I have not had nearly as much experience as I would like to have, but I have run it a bit, and I have some things to say about it. It's a really cool system with some really cool innovations and ideas that you can definitely take and apply to other games if Star Wars isn't your jam. So today I want to talk about inspiration, which is an amazing mechanic. It's a new idea in D&D, and it's a way to bring role-playing to the forefront if that's what you want to do. But it's also just a tool that you as a DM or GM can use in a lot of different ways, and you can take this and make it work for you to encourage things that you want to see in your game. But before we get into inspiration, I first have to tell you about advantage and disadvantage. For any listeners out there that aren't familiar with the new incarnation of D&D, you kind of need to understand advantage and disadvantage for the inspiration conversation to make sense. So one of my favorite things about 5th edition is the new advantage and disadvantage mechanic. And I love this mechanic because it's fast, it's elegant, and it's powerful. A great way to handle numerous situations that come up at the table without having to have pages and pages and pages of rules about all these very specific situations. And it's a lot better way to handle these things than stacking a bunch of positive and negative modifiers like we've seen in previous incarnations of D&D and like we see in a lot of other games. So in a nutshell, if something in the game would give you an advantage on a roll, would make it easier for you, what might be a bonus in other editions or systems, with the advantage mechanic, you instead roll 2 20-sideds instead of 1, and you take the higher number. This is advantage, and it's that simple. Something that would conversely give you a penalty in another game, you instead roll 2 20-sideds and you take the lower number, and this is disadvantage, and it's that simple. So here's an example. Let's say you are attacking a prone target with a melee weapon, then you would have advantage on that attack. So you'd get to roll 2 dice instead of 1, and you take the higher of the 2 rolls. Or attacking a prone target with a ranged weapon, this would give you disadvantage, and you would again roll 2 dice instead of 1, but you would take the lower number. Another example, a non-combat example, let's say you're trying to pass yourself off as an official in a town, and you've lived in this town all your life, and you know the jargon that the officials use. So, you're very well equipped to talk like an official would talk. So the DM decides that will give you an advantage on the roll, and so you roll the 2 dice and take the higher result. Let's say, on the other hand, you're trying to pose as an official in the town, but you are famous and everybody in town knows who you are and knows your face. Then the DM rules that you have disadvantage on this roll. It's going to be a lot harder to pose as an official when everybody knows who you are. And so you would roll 2 dice and take the lower number. So this is really simple, and it's really great for the DM because it's fast and easy to adjudicate. So you don't have to worry about, oh, this person's attacking from higher ground. What kind of a bonus does that give? Or this person's attacking from stealth. What kind of bonus does that give? You don't have to worry about all these different bonuses, and you don't have to do math. You just decide if it would give advantage or disadvantage. It's that simple. So if anything in the situation seems like it would make things easier for the character, they get advantage. If anything seems like it would make it harder, they get disadvantage. And if there are multiple things that apply that would give advantage or disadvantage, well, there's a couple things to keep in mind to handle that. First of all, you can't have multiple advantage or disadvantage. So if there's more than one thing in play that might give the character an edge, they just have advantage. You can't have double advantage or triple advantage. And the same with disadvantage. And the other thing is that anytime you would have advantage and disadvantage on an action, they just cancel each other out, and it's a normal roll. And it doesn't matter how many instances of advantage or disadvantage there are, they all cancel out, and it's a normal roll. And I really like that because anytime things might start to get complicated, like the player's like, well, I have this, this, and this giving me advantage, and the DM's like, well, you have this, this, and this giving you disadvantage, it just all cancels out, and it's a normal roll. So let's say, for example, you're hiding and you're attacking an unaware opponent from stealth. Now this would normally give you advantage on the attack, but your character is also highly intoxicated, which would give you disadvantage on the attack. So the advantage and disadvantage cancel out. Again, it doesn't matter how many instances of advantage and or disadvantage you have. As soon as you have both, they just cancel out, and it's a straight roll. So now that we've kind of nailed down advantage and disadvantage, I can talk about inspiration, which is really what I want to talk about today. So inspiration is kind of an outgrowth of the advantage mechanic, and it's a way that you as DM can leverage this system to reward behavior that you want to see at your table. So it's suggested in the rule books that the DM award inspiration for a player playing his character's flaws and negative personality traits well. But the DM can award inspiration for other reasons as well. This is encouraging role-playing at your table. And it's really easy for players, of course, to role-play things that are going to give them advantages in the game, right? Like, we don't really need to award that behavior because they're going to do that anyway. But if you can get the players to roleplay their flaws, to roleplay the things about their character that hold them back, and to remind the DM in the group, hey, my character has this issue that's going to complicate things here. If you reward that, then that's going to encourage roleplaying overall in that player. So I think inspiration is one of the more awesome innovations of 5th edition, and it's a great way to bring more RP into the game. And I think if you're not using it as a DM, you're really missing out. And I've encountered quite a few DMs that don't even use inspiration. And I suppose it's understandable because it's something that hasn't really existed in D&D before. But if you're not using it, try it out. There's so much you can do with it, and there's so many ways you can use it depending on your style as a DM and depending on what you want to reward the players for. And, remember, whatever you reward the players for, you're sending a message saying, this is what I want from you. So if you use inspiration to reward really good role playing, then you're sending the players the message that, hey, I want you to role play, and if you role play, you're going to get rewarded for it. If you award inspiration for a player saying something really funny at the table, then you're sending the message of, hey, I really want there to be laughs, and I want people to say funny things, and I don't even care if they're in character. If you make everybody laugh, you get an inspiration. So you want to think about what you hand it out for and what kind of message you want to send. Like if you want to have a serious horror game and you want everybody in character, you don't want to award inspiration for people making jokes, especially jokes that aren't in character, right? So you want to think about that. So there are a lot of ways that you can use inspiration to enhance your game. Here's just a few. Like I just said, you can kind of use it as a carrot to reward behavior and gameplay that you want to see more of. So if you want to see more role-playing, use it for that. If you want to see more heroic actions, if you want to see the players taking risks with their characters to do heroic things, then award inspiration for that. You can also use inspiration as a buffer against unfriendly dice and unwanted character death. So this is an awesome way that it can be used, because I guess I have to explain how inspiration works. I haven't done that yet. The way inspiration works is it basically can be spent by the player to give the character an advantage on a roll. And we just explained how advantage works. They get to roll 2 dice instead of 1 and take the higher. If a character has inspiration on any roll, before rolling, the player can say, hey, I'm going to spend my inspiration, and the player now has advantage on that roll. Another way that it can be used is, remember I said that advantage and disadvantage cancel each other out. So if a character is trying something and for some reason the dungeon master says you're going to have disadvantage on this roll, the player can use their inspiration to cancel out the disadvantage, because again, advantage and disadvantage cancel each other out, and inspiration gives you advantage. Now, by the book, you need to declare that you're using your inspiration before you make the roll. You could use it and you would have rolled a 20 anyway, and it doesn't matter, but that's just the way it works. And you can only have one. You either have inspiration or you don't. You can't have more than one inspiration at a time. Now, there is a variant rule in the DMG, and this is how I tend to do it, which says that you can allow a PC or a player to declare inspiration after they roll the die, but before the DM tells them the result. So instead of having to say before you even roll the 20-sided, I'm going to use my inspiration, you can roll the die, see what you rolled, and say you rolled a 3. You can be like, you know what, I'm going to spend my inspiration and roll another d20. But you have to declare that before the DM tells you what happened. So this variant I like because it makes inspiration more useful, and it leads to the players using it more often, because the problem without you doing it this way, where they have to declare it before the roll, is there's a very real chance that the inspiration is going to be wasted and they wouldn't have needed it, because that first die is going to roll something that's good enough, right? So with the variant option, you know, where they get to choose after the roll, there's no chance that they're going to use inspiration at a time where they didn't really need it. And since you can only have one at a time, you know, you kind of want to be able to use it in a way that's useful. So if you use this variant, this really makes inspiration work even better as a buffer against unfriendly dice and unwanted character death. Because, for instance, if a player character is needing to make a saving throw versus some kind of hostile effect like poison or a spell or something like that, and they roll and they get a low number, they can use their inspiration to get another try at that. And especially if it's one of those save or die situations, that can be very helpful and reduce the chances that a character is going to die just because of one bad dice roll. Also, inspiration, because of this, can be a great way to hedge against a total party kill or TPK. This is really helpful if an encounter starts to go south due to no fault of the players. So we just did, as part of the Game Masters Roundtable blog series, we just did a post about lethality in games. And I talked about that in the last episode 22 of Game Master's Journey. And if you go check out those show notes, there's links to all those blogs. But we all talked about, you know, how lethal are your games, how often do player characters tend to die, and kind of what's your philosophy about it? And we had GMs from various systems, and we had a pretty good spread of opinions, from GMs who think that a player character should never die unless it's planned by the player, to GMs who let the dice fall, and if a PC dies, the PC dies, so be it, and everywhere in between. So if you're, more on the less lethal side of the scale, where you don't want characters to die, and especially the entire party to die just because of bad dice rolls, then the inspiration mechanic is a great way to kind of hedge against that. Now, personally, if a PC is going to die because the player did something stupid or did something that they should have known better than to do, then hey, consequences, right? Another great way that this can come into play is if you, as a DM, have thrown an encounter at your PCs and you realize in the middle of the encounter that you gave them more than they can handle. And this way you don't have to have, something improbable happen to save the player characters, like a deity coming in or NPC showing up to help them. You can just encourage them to use their inspiration. And another way you can help with this, if things are really going south, is you can start handing out inspiration. And I actually had this happen once. It wasn't a encounter that I designed. It was in Tyranny of Dragons. But there was a spell that was new to me. It's a new 5th edition spell, and it turned out being very powerful against the PCs, and I had a TPK imminent. And so I started handing out inspiration, and I didn't just give it away just to give it away. Like I looked for reasons to give it out, but I probably handed out 2 or 3 inspiration in that one encounter. And I think there is at least one PC where they had inspiration, they used it to avoid dying, and then I gave them another one like a round later because they did something cool or whatever. So this is a way that you as the DM can help to prevent a wipe if you just kind of miscalculated and threw something at the party that they can't handle. And it's a little less breaking of verisimilitude and realism than maybe having NPCs show up from nowhere to help the party. Now, if you're going to do this, I would recommend not to give out too much inspiration. I think a good rule of thumb is don't give out more than 1 per 2 PCs in the party. And don't give an individual PC more than 2 inspiration in a given game session, because you want players to learn from their mistakes, and you don't want to make things too easy. You want there to be a certain amount of deadliness, or it ceases being a game. And you want them to suffer the consequences of bad decisions or foolish actions. But if you're in a situation where the dice are just going wrong, or maybe you design the encounter improperly or something like that, where things are going south fast and it's no fault of the players or the characters, then inspiration can help you out with that. I think another great thing about inspiration is that it increases player agency, and it gives players more of a feeling of control over what happens to their characters. Part of the game is the randomness of the dice, and I think it's an important part of the game. I wouldn't want to play the game without that. But it can, especially when you're having an unlucky night, lead you to feel as a player like you have no control and you're just doomed and there's nothing you can do about it. So inspiration is a nice way for you to feel like you have a little bit more control, and if there's a really important role, you can spend your inspiration and greatly increase your odds of success. So in order to use inspiration more effectively in our games, it helps to have some more ideas and guidelines about how and when to award inspiration as a DM. And again, what you give inspiration out for is sending a message to your players. So be very sure that you're sending the message that you want to send. So again, in the DMG, we're not given a lot of guidance as far as when to use or when to give out inspiration, basically when they play up a flaw or negative personality trait. However, I gave it some thought, and here are some other ideas of when you can give out some inspiration, and I do these in my games. So first of all, in the beginning of the campaign, you can award inspiration for outstanding background write-ups and character development at character creation. And so, if you have a player that just goes above and beyond with coming up with the background of their character and really giving you a multi-dimensional, fleshed out character at the very beginning of the campaign, then you can reward them by giving them inspiration. So this allows a PC to begin play with inspiration, which is pretty cool and can be very helpful to kind of help out those squishy first level characters a bit. This also will encourage your players to put more thought into their character before the game starts, which always helps your game out and always makes it more enjoyable for everyone. And it leads to a living, breathing character instead of just a collection of numbers on a piece of paper. And D&D 5th edition is already helping out with this a lot, with the backgrounds are really helping us to flesh out our characters and have them be more than just a block of stats, but encouraging your players to go even beyond that and come up with more for their characters by awarding them inspiration can have great results. You can also award inspiration for in-character creations by the players, things like journal entries, letters, and sketches. And you might want to do that because these kinds of things not only add depth to the characters, but it also adds a lot to the immersion of the players in your game overall. However, if you're going to do this, remember not everybody has the same skill set. So try not to judge these creations on how quote unquote good they are, but judge them more on the amount of effort that went into it. Not everyone's an artist, not everyone's a writer. So, you might have one player who can make awesome sketches and, it might be tempting to be giving this player inspiration all the time. And then you got another character or another player that's making stick figures and you might be like, well, that's not worthy of inspiration. But try to look at it more as, what they put into it than necessarily how quote unquote good it is. Basically, if the creation adds to the enjoyment of the players and the GM, then it's probably worthy of a reward. You can also award inspiration for anything a player or a PC does that goes above and beyond. So you want to be, or try to be, consistent in the kinds of things you award inspiration for, so that the players can kind of learn your style and anticipate what kinds of things will earn rewards and what won't. And you also want to be consistent among the players and, not play favorites, obviously. However, you should also gradually expect more from your players as the campaign goes on. So just as a higher level character needs more XP to advance a level, you should expect more from higher level characters to earn inspiration than you did when they were low level. So that's just a couple ideas of ways that you can award inspiration. And honestly, my advice to you when you're creating your campaign or you're getting ready for your adventure and you're wondering, well, what do I award inspiration for? Because this is something I think you should give some thought to and not just do it, on a whim. Because again, you want to be consistent and you're going to set a precedence whether you mean to or not. You're going to set a precedent when you award inspiration, and the players are going to rightfully expect that you're going to uphold that. So what you can think about is, what do I want from my players? What kind of behaviors do I want to reward? And it could be things like role playing. It could be things like saying something funny or witty. It could be things like doing something heroic. It could be interacting with your NPCs. And this is another great way where you can look at an established group that you already have, an established game, and say, what would I like to see that I'm not seeing? So maybe you have a group where they never want to role play with your NPCs. Now, part of this problem may be with your NPCs, and you might want to come up with some more interesting NPCs. But maybe it's just, you have some hack and slash players and they never role play and you want to encourage them to role play. Well, this is another great way that you can use inspiration to encourage the behavior you want to see. So you just wait until a player does role play with an NPC, just even a little bit, and you give them inspiration for it. And you say something like, hey, you role played with the NPC. I really like that. I really dig how that added to the story. So here you go. Have an inspiration. And even, hack and slash players will see that and say, hey, inspiration gives me a tactical advantage in combat. All I have to do is go talk to an NPC and I could get inspiration. And boom, you've got players talking to NPCs. And then you can just session by session raise the bar. It's like, well, last week I gave you inspiration for saying one thing to an NPC, but But now, I'm going to expect a little bit more from you, and you can just gradually raise that bar as you go and encourage more and better role playing. And you can use that for all kinds of things. For instance, let's say you have a group that's really bad at metagaming and really bad at having conversations during combat that their characters couldn't have. You could award inspiration for not doing that or doing it less. So maybe you have a combat and there was no metagaming in that combat. You could say, hey, you know what? Everybody gets inspiration because you guys didn't metagame in that combat, and I really appreciate that. And you've just said a message, and the players think, hey, if we metagame less, we'll get more inspiration. But again, you want to raise that bar over time. You don't want to just be handing out inspiration all the time for things that the PCs have been doing forever, right? And I mean, you could even use this for out-of-game stuff as well, Like maybe you've got one guy that always brings snacks for everybody. And nobody else ever thinks or remembers to bring snacks for anybody. Well, maybe give that guy inspiration. And then maybe next week someone else will bring snacks. I mean, there's just so many ways that you can use it. And it's up to you. It's up to your style. And it's up to, what you want to happen in your game. But it's a great kind of carrot that you can hold out there to accomplish things in your game. Again, without having to railroad or force your players to do something they don't want to do. It's just like, hey, if you do this thing, there's a reward. So finally, I have some ideas for some inspiration variants and optional rules you could use. And if you want to learn more about this, head on over to the show notes, and I'm going to have a lot more in a companion blog post for this, where I will list even more of these ideas I have for different ways you can use inspiration that I don't have time for in the show. So these are various ways that you can make inspiration more powerful and more useful in your game. As with any time you start monkeying with rules, you want to be careful and really think about what you're doing and, make small changes, play test it, see how it goes, and go from there. Some of these will synergize really well with each other. But some of them, if you use them in combination, could really get out of hand. So you want to be careful. So as I mentioned before, really consider, and this is one I do, using the optional rule where the PC can choose to use inspiration after the die is rolled, but before the result is announced. And again, this makes it easier for them to use their inspiration without a fear of wasting it. And it allows them to have it and use it when it really matters. And this also improves inspiration's ability to buffer against bad die rolls and character deaths. Now, it does make inspiration a little bit more powerful, but I think more importantly, it makes it more relevant. Another way that you could use inspiration is you could have a house rule where spending inspiration allows you to automatically succeed at a death save. So inspiration is already very useful in death saves because you get 2 20-sideds, which gives you a much better chance of rolling a 10 or higher. But you could make it even more powerful against character death by saying if you spend inspiration, you automatically succeed at the death save. Or an even more powerful version is you could say that spending inspiration automatically stabilizes you at 0 hit points. So this is a great way to further buffer against PC death. And this also works great for a GM who wants a lower mortality rate and also rolls in the open. So if you're not rolling behind the screen and you're rolling dice in the open, and yet you don't want player characters to die, I don't know that that's a great combination, but if that's you and you don't want to fudge rolls, then this can be a great way to further avoid player character death. Another variation you can consider is allowing PCs to accumulate more than 1 inspiration during a session. So as I said before, by the rules, you can only have inspiration or not have it. You can't have multiple inspiration, but you could allow them to have more than 1 inspiration. The way I would do this is any inspiration in excess of 1 are lost at the end of the session. So if they don't use it, they lose it. And I would limit the number of inspiration they have by tier. And I would just make it equal to the tier. So tier 1, which is levels 1 to 4, you can have 1 inspiration. Tier 2, levels 5 to 10, you can have 2 inspiration. Tier 3, levels 11 to 16, you can have 3 inspiration. And tier 4, levels 17 through 20, you can have 4 inspiration. So this makes inspiration and any of the variants that you use much more powerful. You could also allow use of inspiration during a short rest to recover some hit points. And the way I would do this is I would say that you can roll a number of hit dice equal to your tier when you spend an inspiration to do this. So tier 1, levels 1 to 4, you get 1 hit die. Tier 2, 2 hit die. Tier 3, 3 hit die. Tier 4, 4 hit die. So for example, Jim's character is a 5th level rogue with a constitution modifier +1. He can spend his inspiration during a short rest to gain 2d8 plus 2 hit points, again because he's tier 2. So this might be a good option in a campaign with a lot of combat, but with few chances for long rests. So there's just a few ideas of variant rules that you can use with inspiration and optional ways that PCs can use inspiration. Again, I will have more of these in the blog post. This is just a few of them, so check it out. So there we go. I think that's a pretty good discussion of inspiration and why I really like it as a mechanic. And again, if you haven't used it in your game, try it out, see what you think. However, of course, if you're trying it out for the first time, I would just do it by the book. I wouldn't try any of my crazy alternate rules that I talked about today. But if you're using inspiration, let me know what you think of it. Are you a fan of it like me or not? I'd love to hear from you. That is going to wrap up episode 23 of Game Master's Journey. If you would like to reach me, please email me at gamemastersjourney@gmail.com. You can find me on Google+. Just search for Lex Starwalker. And you can follow me on Twitter at Lex Starwalker. Please visit the website starwalkerstudios.com. There you can find the show notes with all kinds of helpful links, as well as a link to our Google Plus community. And if you enjoy the show and you'd like to help us out, a great way that you can help out the show is if you use iTunes. Head on over to iTunes and give us a review. We'd really appreciate it. And anyone who gives Game Master's Journey a 5-star review on iTunes will be thanked by me personally on the show. So once again, I want to thank you so much for downloading and listening to the show. And thanks so much for joining me for the beginning of season 2. Lots of exciting episodes on the horizon. I will be back with a new episode next week. Until then, game on.
This has been a Starwalker Studios production, your source for quality gaming and hobby podcasts.
This episode's music provided by Cloudwalker, Renfield, Transboy, and Ish. Please see the show notes for more details at starwalkerstudios.com/GameMastersJourney.